Welcome to Spenny and the Nets, a podcast covering the Brooklyn Nets, hosted by me. I'm Spen Harris. We are not joined by Nick today. He is taking his, bi-monthly break from the podcast, but we do have a really special guest today. I'm excited. He covers the Nets for Nets Wire. That's part of the USA Today family. Sharif Phillips-Keaton. Sharif, welcome to Spenny and the Nets.
Well, Spen, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always good to, hop on these podcasts and talk some ball. So, I'm excited.
I appreciate it. You're a much better guest than my normal co-host, Nick. Those who listen to the podcast know Nick's Nets opinions are a little bit erratic. They're a little all over the place. Some people even question, does he watch the games? Does he not? Regardless of how you feel about Nick, I know that you cover this team very closely. You watch every game. And you know what's going on. So I think we're in for a good episode today.
Yeah. I sure hope so. I mean, I know this season has been up and down in a variety of ways for everyone involved, not just Nets fans, but be nice to, chop it up, talk some Nets.
Absolutely. So let's get started. The Nets, for those listening right now, February 18th, 4:02 p.m. The Nets are 20-34. They eclipsed their preseason over-under for wins. They got the over. I think the number was 19.5, right, Sharif?
Yeah, some bookmakers had it at 18.5. It was like 18.5, 19.5, depending on who you looked at.
So this team is exceeding expectations. They are 12th place in the East right now. And what Nets fans do not want to hear, they are 6th in the lottery odds. They finished the All-Star break, or at least right before the All-Star break, winning 5 of their final 6 games, much to the dismay of pretty much everybody rooting for this team to tank. So I guess we can start there, Sharif. Give me your overall thoughts on just how this Nets team has played up to this point, and we'll start there.
So it's actually been interesting, and I mean, you and everybody else will intimately by now. I mean, beginning of the season, that's, we're like 9-10 through their first 19. And that was already an overachievement because, Dennis Schroeder was playing out of his mind. We saw the beginning of Cam Johnson having his career year. Then they hit that low. I think it was like about 4 or 5 games, and then they traded Dennis, and then they weren't really winning games, but you could tell they were still competitive enough. I think they had beat Milwaukee. Then they traded Dorian Finney-Smith and Shake Milton to the Lakers. And then ever since they got D'Lo, as fans know, he can still play. And, that was supposed to be more of a salary move by the Lakers. And normally that doesn't, that's usually not to the benefit of the team that player is going to. But, D'Lo's been in Brooklyn before. So, he probably got back to what he was doing. And then now, as you put it pretty succinctly, they've won 5 of 6 going into the All-Star break, and now they might have better odds than the Philadelphia 76ers, who were expected to be somewhat of a championship contender. So this season's been all over the place.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary, and thank you for sharing that. The one thing I think about D'Lo is, he played with LeBron James before this. There is a certain level of pressure when you're playing with the second or first greatest of all time, whoever you ask. There's a pressure when you play with LeBron James and playing in Los Angeles. So I think I say that to say the D'Lo that we saw over there, I don't think was the D'Lo that we saw in Brooklyn all those years back. And you put a guy who was playing with LeBron to now playing with guys like Cam Johnson and Nick Claxton, who are good in their own right, but they're not LeBron James. All of a sudden, you become a top 2 player on this team, especially with Cam Thomas still out due to injury. And you're kind of seeing D'Angelo Russell play this free brand of basketball where, hey, no one's going to care if you miss a 3-pointer. People actually going to probably be happy about it. And, you can play with this level of freedom and autonomy that you just couldn't do in LA. So I kind of attribute a lot of that to his success so far with the Nets. But yeah, it's shocking. And I don't know if fans should be shocked, because you look at this starting 5 right now, even with no CT, it's a better starting 5 than the bottom dreads of the NBA. Like we talked about Cam Johnson career year, Nick Claxton, even having a down year, he's still a decent player in this league, especially against the bottom half of centers. You add D'Lo to that mix, and then who are the other two starters? It would be Keon Johnson, and who's the fifth guy right now?
And Zaire Williams.
Zaire Williams, who's also kind of having a resurgence in Brooklyn. So I don't know if fans should be very shocked about this team and the way they're competing right now. We haven't mentioned our head coach's name yet, but obviously you got to credit Jordi Fernandez to having this team prepared to play, not listening to the noise of the fan base, the media, Las Vegas. I mean, he has them ready to go every single night. So I say all this to ask you this. Do fans have a right to be upset that this team is continuing to win games despite Sean Marks trading the Rockets for the Nets 2025 pick back? Like, it's almost like out of our front office's control at this point, right?
I think, in summary, I think fans do have a right to be upset, especially when, we heard from the longest time via reports and even, coming from Sean Marks himself in the offseason, hey, we're building with Mikal Bridges as part of the fold. And then, up until draft night, then he gets traded to the Knicks for 1,000 first-round picks. They pay Nick Claxton. So then you're just like, okay, next season you're going in with like Dennis Schroeder, who's, always had up and down career, even though he's always been a good player. Then he starts the season like he did. I think he scored like 25 or more points in like the first like 5 of the first like 7 games. Like he was balling out, CJ balled out. And then like, now you're like, well, this season was supposed to be a rebuilding year. We were supposed to at least try to get into the top 3, have a chance at drafting Cooper Flag, which is obviously always still there, but just have a better chance of doing it. And now you look at it, this team, the Nets are 1.5 games out of the 10th spot with, Philly being tied with them. And then Chicago is holding the 10th spot. Chicago basically gave up on the season. And the Hawks basically gave up on the season. So if things go, I guess, depending on how you look at it, right or wrong, the Nets could be in the play-in. And if things even go better or worse, depending on how you look at it, could be in the playoffs. And then, this season isn't about, capture the flag anymore or Ace Bailey. It's about, oh, do you feel good getting like Derek Queen as the best player from the draft, for example, which is obviously he's a good player, but just I think fans have a right to be upset.
I get it. I was upset when we started winning games with D'Lo after we traded away Schroeder. I understood us getting rid of Dorian Finney-Smith, but I didn't understand why we would bring in D'Lo and assume that the team would be really any different than it was with Dennis Schroeder. I think that D'Lo and Dennis Schroeder's effectiveness is similar. They do it in very different ways. D'Lo's a little bit more smooth in terms of off the dribble, his offensive game. I think Schroeder is just going to beat you with sheer quickness and great decision making. But I got to a point as a fan, Sharif, where at some point, like, I do think Sean Marks tried to tank this season. Now, I want to get into the lack of moves made during the trade deadline, or I'm sorry, right before the trade deadline in a second. But I get to a place as a fan where I'm like, at some point, I can't keep rooting for them to lose. And I might as well just enjoy it when they win and when they play good basketball. And I get the argument that, yeah, long-term, you want a young franchise player. And by playing well this season in quote unquote meaningless games from everybody, that like, it's not going to help us in the future. But it goes against my instinct as a fan. If they keep on winning at some point, I'm just going to start to appreciate them for what it is. They're playing not terrible basketball against some of the worst teams in the NBA. And they're actually, they beat the Rockets a few weeks ago. Like, they're still competing against teams that are the top of the NBA. So I don't know. At some point, like, yes, tanking was the plan. Sean Marks failed at that, but I feel like you gotta almost let it go. We're already, really into the season. And I just wish more Nets fans were understanding of these players winning games. I guess that's kind of the end of my rant.
Yeah, I think there's validity on both sides of the issue. On one side, if you're a fan who just wants to see the team do well, regardless of what that means moving forward as far as the draft or free agency, then this season is probably the one for you, because then you can root for people like, D'Lo, Cam Thomas when he comes back, Noah Clowney, Cam Johnson, who didn't get traded at the deadline, Nick Claxton, all these guys. And I understand the fans on the other side too, because at the end of the day, this is professional sports. We see it in the NBA. We see it in the NFL. The best way for you to get your next impact player, star, superstar, whatever it may be, is in the draft, and you go from there. And if you're the Nets, you haven't had a superstar player since the Big Three was here, and we already know how that ended. And I've always said this to people I've talked to, it's a lottery for a reason. The Nets, anything could happen for the rest of the season. The Nets could still end up with the number one pick. Obviously, if you're going to go into the probability of things, that's not the best way to handle an event of that nature. But the point is, you are where you are now, and certain things didn't shake out as expected. I understand your viewpoint, and that's usually how I am when I'm rooting for someone. Is just, hey, let's just try to get the best basketball we can out there. And for other fans, I understand, their concerns. Only thing I would say is just hold out hope that you still get that number one pick.
That's a good message. It's funny I feel this way about the Nets, because about the New York Football Giants, I am the complete opposite. They should not have won that game late in the season where Drew Lock went berserk. I was it against the Colts. They should not have won that game. They should have lost all the games after they were guaranteed to get the number one pick, because there isn't a lottery in the NFL. So in the NFL, actual tanking will make sense if you want that number one pick. Sharif, I want to stay with the narrative regarding Sean Marks and almost not doing more to tank this season. Were you surprised that the Nets did not make any major trades before the deadline, such as moving Cam Johnson, moving D'Angelo Russell again, or moving a Nick Claxton, Day'Ron Sharpe?
I will say I was slightly surprised they didn't move CJ, only for the simple fact that he was pretty much in every single report regarding a trade rumor since the season began. And normally when a player is that the player's name is that involved, they get moved, whether that team that moved them is getting, maximum value for them or not. And I mean, Day'Ron Sharpe's name did come up, pretty a lot, or, in some circles, but I figured, dime a dozen, like if you trade Day'Ron Sharpe, then you got to figure out backup center. And I don't know if the Nets wanted to resort to the buyout market. And when it comes to, holding on to D'Lo, he's an expiring contract. And, holding on to Ben Simmons as long as they did, I don't have any reporting on this, but I imagined they probably tried to trade those guys, see if you can flip them for second-round picks, see if you can get anything for Ben. My guess was they weren't getting the offers they were expected, so it's like, hey, Ben, just buy you out. We get $1 million back under a salary cap, work with that. D'Lo, he's a veteran presence. Everyone talks highly of him. Maybe that also helps speed up the development of players like Keon Johnson, CT, when he gets back on the floor. And then you still get the most salary cap space in the league next season. So I figured I assume Sean Marks and the front office was just like, hey, we tried to do what we could. It didn't go as intended, and obviously Sean Marks has to bear that blame. But outside of that, I mean, they did what they could to maximize value. And sometimes you don't want to lose value just to make the right move.
I understand that. I get that. You don't want to have a team underpay for an asset from you. I understand that. My next question, actually, it's a segment. So this is called Will They Stay or Will They Go? So I have a list of Nets players, and I just want to know which of these guys is going to be on the team for the foreseeable future. And by that, I just mean next season, right? So do we think this guy stays or is he gone after this offseason? Number one, Cam Johnson.
I think he stays.
I'd have to agree with you. Number 2, D'Angelo Russell.
I think he's gone.
Think he's gone. Okay. Number 3, I have a feeling they're going to re-sign him, but that's just because I've seen people on Twitter say it. That's like me just stealing someone's opinion, so you don't have to. There's nothing to that. Cam Thomas.
I think he stays.
Okay. This one, that's where it gets interesting. Nick Claxton.
That's actually interesting. I think he stays, if for nothing else, because I don't think the Nets are going to get, if they were open to trading him in the offseason, I don't think they would get the offers based on right now. If Nick Claxton finishes off the season and he plays more like he did last season and the season before that, he probably is gone, because I'm sure they would probably want to just, get as much room as you can into the salary cap. But if Claxton is going to be up and down like he has been this season, they probably won't move him, because I don't know if the Nets will get the offers they would want to move someone that has been so pivotal to the team in Claxton, especially with that contract.
Yeah, I think without looking, Claxton's the longest tenured Net.
Yeah,
I don't think there's a guy who's been on the team longer than him, and he was drafted by the Nets. And yeah, it's kind of the opposite of the Cam Johnson situation, where this season Cam Johnson's value's higher than it's ever been in his career. Whereas I agree, Claxton's value, just based on the way he's played, is lower than it's been throughout his career. What about the backup center, Day'Ron Sharpe? Does he stay or is he gone?
That is actually interesting too. I think he's gone, because I have the suspicion the Nets are going to try to fill backup center in this upcoming draft. Start over with, a center on a cheap contract, and just, I don't know if that will necessarily be Derek Queen or someone with their later first round picks. But I do think they're going to try to recycle that backup spot and try to keep it cheap, because Day'Ron has earned himself a pay raise. I don't know if they'll be willing to pay him what the market is willing to pay him to bring him back next season, if they're trying to, recycle the payroll.
Yeah, I can see him going too. I don't know if you keep Claxton and Sharpe. I mean, it's a good front court, but they're very similar in terms of what they do. Claxton's a little bit bigger of a jumper. I think Sharpe's a little bit better on the boards. Maybe Claxton I give the nod to defensively, just because he's a little bit more versatile on how many positions he can cover. Okay, these are 3 guys that are fighting for playing time in general. We'll start with Jalen Wilson.
Jalen Wilson. I'll say this. I think he's gone only because I think the Nets are most likely going to use all the picks they got in this draft. And I think that's just going to squeeze out players like Jalen Wilson, who I like. Jalen Wilson, he's nice to talk to. It's just this season to me has been a disappointment for him, just because I feel like the way he shot the ball last season hasn't carried over to this season. And that was going to be, to me, the one skill he had to improve on if he was going to stick around. So I think he's gone after this season.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. His shooting's been extremely inconsistent. And I just haven't seen enough from him this season, if I'm the Brooklyn Nets, to want to just give him I guess, does his contract expire at the end of the season?
I can check. Because he was the second round pick last year. So he might actually have another year.
Another year, yeah. Okay, interesting. All right, 2 more names on this list. The first is Zaire Williams.
I think he stays. Like you pointed out earlier, he's had a resurgence. And I mean, I think he's showing, especially since he's come back from that knee injury, I think that cost him like 9 or 10 games. He's starting to put it all together. Like, obviously on the defensive end, he's, a disruptor at every level, defending the rim, getting into ball handler space and, taking that away from them. And with the way he's been shooting the ball since he came back from that knee injury, I think that's all the Nets, I assume, needed to see from him to buy into him, because I think that was probably why Memphis became which I mean was also a numbers game in Memphis. But I think if he was shooting the ball better, they would have, kept, held on to him. I think he stays. Obviously, the market will dictate, but I don't think he's priced himself out of Brooklyn. I think he'll be here.
I think fans would love to see him back. He's done everything that I think the Nets have asked and more. Not only is he hitting that open three, and we're seeing the athleticism on offense, but he's played some really good defense this year. I'm thinking of a game recently. He had the block. He blocked a 3-point shot, and then he got fouled on the fast break going down. There are not a lot of guys in this league that can make that play, blocking the 3-point shot and then taking it the length of the court. So he's just been absolutely fantastic to watch this season.
Yeah, especially in I'll be honest, if you had asked me this question before the season, I would have told you I'm not sure, mostly because I wasn't that familiar with Zaire Williams' game, but also the Nets, and I mean it's been reported by various people. It doesn't seem like there's any one player that they're like, this guy is untouchable. Now that might just be reporting. That might not be how Sean Marks and Joe Tsai feel, but if there's anyone who has benefited from the Nets trying to, get as many young guys in the building as possible in the building as possible and see what happens, Zaire Williams is definitely one of them. So I think he's coming back.
Hell yeah, I couldn't agree more. Last name on this list, the G League guy who's been getting some playing time as of late, Tosan Awuma.
Oh, he's coming back. I don't see the Nets letting him go.
They like him, man. They like him a lot.
Yeah. I mean, Jordy has, spoken, pleasantries about him. And I mean, he should. I mean, Tosan came out of nowhere and just casually hitting 15-footers and, being physical on the boards and pretty much just doing what's asked of him. Also, it should be noted that his two-way does go into next season. So he's probably going to hold that spot either way. But yeah, I think even if he was only on the two-way for this season, I would think he's coming back. He's just played too well since coming to Brooklyn.
He's been a really nice surprise. 2 questions. These are unrelated to the segment we just did. First one's a draft question. Realistically, where do you see the Nets falling in next year's draft?
I guess the best way to answer this is I don't think they're getting into the top 3, which was the goal before the season of any team that's rebuilding is top 3. That means you have the same odds as the other 2 teams to get the number 1 overall pick. I don't think they're getting that. Could they squeeze into the top 5? Possibly, because I think the teams ahead of them right now are the Toronto Raptors and the Charlotte Hornets, I believe. And the Raptors, I'm not sure what they're doing with Brandon Ingram, but even without him, I think they'll be better than their record says they are, just as long as they stay healthy. The Hornets, it'd be tough to lose more games than them, especially with Brandon Miller out for the season. But if LaMelo Ball can stay healthy, I mean, they could probably string together some wins. So I see the Nets picking in the top 5, but I don't think they're getting in top 3.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I'd like the Raptors to surpass us. If I was a betting man, I'd bet on that. But Hornets 13 wins, 39 losses. We're at 20 and 34. I'm not sure that the Hornets catch us, which is not great. But yeah, listen, 4 or 5 would be better than 6, 7, right? Like you want the highest pick possible. So I appreciate that. All right, this is a critical thinking question, and it's a difficult question to ask because I'm not really sure I know the answer. But my question is, do you believe in Sean Marks' ultimate plan to make this team a contender again? Like, are we buying into this guy having a real just goal in mind to get us to contention in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I guess it's a 2-parter. For one, I do believe in it because whether you want to give Sean Marks all of the credit or not, it did happen under his watch. But obviously you can say, well, KD and Kyrie just chose to sign in Brooklyn and Sean Marks just happened to be the GM. I like to think, big moves like that are more complicated than just two guys decide to sign there, no matter who was there. Because, players may not always talk about this, but the coach who's there matters. The general manager who's there matters. The owner who's there matters. So I would like to give Sean Marks some credit for that. How much? I don't know. As far as do I have faith that he'll be able to bring them to that point again without a move like that happening, that might be a little tough. I would say it's probably about 40-60, 40 being the chance that it works out, because even if you look at this season, let's say they finish with the best pick possible, they pick 5. So you're not getting Cooper Flagg, you're not getting Ace Bailey, you're not getting Dylan Harper. Maybe you walk away with VJ Edgecombe or Kasparis Yakachonis, maybe. But Cooper Flagg is just playing. I mean, they all are. But Cooper Flagg is just playing at such a level that people are just more sure that he's a generational player than they are less sure. And if the Nets don't even get, Harper or Bailey, now you're just hoping you can get one of those kind of guys next year, whether it's getting AJ DeBanza or Darren Peterson or someone like that. And then if you don't get either one of those guys, you got to hope, I guess, Giannis wants out of Milwaukee or someone wants out of somewhere, and that's always tricky ground. So I think if the question is how likely is it to happen with Sean Marks as general manager, it's probably less likely than it is more likely. But I do think Sean Marks is willing to make the moves possible to make it happen, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. And he traded for $1 million first-round picks. The Nets have our first round. So I get what you're saying. Our entire body is dipped into the, let's get a high draft pick pool. The question is, can the Nets be bad enough where it actually happens?
Right.
All right. A few more segments. This one, I call it end of an era. Ben Simmons was bought out by the Nets shortly before the All-Star break, and he signed with the Los Angeles Clippers for the rest of the season, ironically joining James Harden's team, who he was traded for 3 years back. Give me one word you would use to remember Ben Simmons' tenure in Brooklyn. I'll start. The word I would use is sad.
I think that's pretty good. I would say disappointing. I think, and it's funny because I actually wrote about this in more of a longer piece, but and I think pretty much everyone who's been around the Nets organization, fan or media, has the same opinion, is that, and I've actually had this talk with various guys too. When the Nets traded for Ben Simmons, it's not like they went into it like, hey, this is our goal, is to get Ben Simmons, but James Harden, put their feet to the fire for his reasons, and then things unfolded as they should. My one word is disappointing, and really, it's only really disappointing for the Nets, because I think when you look at Ben Simmons, yes, he went through injuries, and that shouldn't be glossed over. And who knows, that all those back surgeries and those various knee injuries probably limit his ceiling for the rest of his career, and he's not even 30 yet. So it's obviously disappointing for him. But when it comes to the Nets, you traded away James Harden, who helped the Sixers basically stay where they were, which was contending for the Eastern Conference Finals, second round, what have you. And then he went to the Clippers and possibly has the chance to do the same thing. Ben came to Brooklyn, either couldn't play, or when he did play, wasn't the same as before, even though he had flashes here and there. And now the era just ends, and the Nets aren't really better off for it. So it's just disappointing.
Yeah, sad and disappointing. I think those are two pretty good one-word adjectives to describe the Ben Simmons tenure here. All right, next segment up, All-Star Game chat. This past weekend, Sharif, we had the highly anticipated All-Star weekend where the Brooklyn Nets had one player who was a part of All-Star Weekend festivities, and that was Cam Johnson. Competed in the 3-point competition. Didn't do the best. Had 14 in the first round and was unable to advance. I think going first is also tough. Like that's got to be the hardest thing to go first, and whatever your score is, people just beat it right away. But my question to you is what did you think of All-Star Weekend overall, and how can it be fixed?
So this is going to sound like the majority of opinion, but I think All-Star Weekend was disappointing, but not in the way I've seen most people talk about it, which is basically the All-Star game, which, that's a separate thing I'll get to in a second. I think part of the thing that needs to be changed about All-Star Weekend is just how drawn out it is, in the sense of, the players, obviously there's All-Star practice, which doubles as media availability for everybody who's there, which is fine. That part is fine. It's just Saturday, they start off with a 3-point contest, and I don't know, maybe it's just because I haven't been as dialed in on the All-Star. It just feels like everything's drawn out to like maximize runtime, because the players get 60 seconds to do a round or whatever, and then the time to the next person, it felt like they need, okay, we got to go to commercial, and then we come back for commercial, we got to have, I don't know, Kevin Hart or someone do some bit, and then like that continued into, and then what happened during the All-Star game to me is just unacceptable. That you start the game, it's not even halfway through the game, so you could say it's a halftime, and then you just have this, and I get it, it's an important moment because inside the NBA will not be on TNT after this year, but then you have this long drawn out thing in the middle of the All-Star game. It just, I just think it's all too drawn out for commercial purposes. I think that part needs to change.
And that, I mean, if you're going to Adam Silver tomorrow, how are you suggesting they fix it? Just make it less drawn out, I guess.
Yeah. So I kind of get some of my inspiration from, there was a tweet that Mark J. Spears put out, and he's been talking to various players, and he says handlers, so I assume that's like agents and entourage, people like that. And the players feel all of that, fluff and commercial stuff should just be saved for Friday and Saturday. And then Sunday should just be the players come in and basically pretend it's a real game. Like they come in, they get their pregame routine, just like it's a regular, and then like they get the adequate time to warm up. That's the reason Anthony Edwards said that he didn't play, because they didn't get enough time to warm up like they're used to. And then if they started treating Sunday like it's an actual game, that would go a long way to making the players feel like this is worth going all out for.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think back to when the All-Star game was big with like Kobe and MJ, and that was all about the game, right? No one was asking about Mr. Beast, or Kevin Hart wasn't making appearances. Like it was all about just Kobe going at MJ, even if it was a one-on-one matchup. Like that's what we wanted to see. What comes to my mind right away, and tell me your thoughts on this, is give whoever wins home court advantage in the finals. Like I know a lot of people have an issue with that, but what do you think of that idea to incentivize guys to really go all out during the All-Star game?
I think it's a good idea. And I think I've seen some people say they do this in MLB. I think it's a nice idea because it gives each side to play for it. Now, I do think if that were to be implemented, then they would have to do East-West and not the pickup format where so I think you would literally have to go back to East-West. And now some players did talk about, I think Draymond Green, made his thoughts perfectly clear about them playing to a target score and not just like, here's the amount of time you're out here, play whoever, has the higher score by the end of the time wins. I don't think that's as much of a big deal, but if that is how players feel, hey, make it as much of a real game as possible. And you can even do like if the East win, even if the Western Conference team has the better record, the East team won the All-Star game. I think there are some different implications because not everyone who's in the All-Star game is going to be involved. But, I think it's a good idea either way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Make it a regular game. Like the target score, the pickup stuff, that's cute. And I'm all in favor of a one-on-one tournament maybe on Saturday, right? Like do that instead of the skills competition because no one gives a flying fuck about the skills competition. I'm sorry, but I guarantee you in 3 years, no one's going to remember who won the 2025 skills competition. But yeah, in terms of the All-Star game, like, yes, you're right. It would have to go back to East versus West in order for the winning team to get home court advantage. And even guys, like my thought process is even guys who aren't in playoff contention or their teams aren't as good, they're still going to want to compete and put on, like they're going to want to impress, the guys, in the 1 through 4 seeds. Like maybe they're auditioning to play for those teams in the future. So I do think it would incentivize everyone to play harder, have some pride in being on the East or the West, all-star team. And yeah, I think it'd be a great idea. Okay. 2 more segments. Number 1, this one's actually pretty funny. It's called A Kid Can Dream. With the way things have gone down in Phoenix this year, and with the way a former Brooklyn Net has spoken very highly regarding his tenure during his time in Brooklyn, is there any way Kevin Durant ever dons a Brooklyn Nets uniform again?
This is actually, it is a really funny segment. Not going to lie, and I'm not going to try to, gaslight anybody here. There's a non-zero chance KD comes back to Brooklyn. Now, I think if we're going to look at it, somewhat within the confines of where the Suns are right now, clearly, based on reports, they've pissed off KD with his name being involved in trade rumors. And I think most people know the only reason Suns even did that is because Bradley Beal has a no trade clause, and that pretty much went nowhere. If they end up having to trade KD, I think there's a non-zero chance he comes back to Brooklyn. It all would depend on, in my opinion, what moves they could make this offseason to entice him. And that is where it's really good that, Sean Marks in the front office have as much cap space as they do. Because then if you're like, hey, this guy is available in free agency, if we can sign him, are you down? And let's say KD is down. I mean, I think at this point he just wants to hoop, as he always says. But I think the one thing, I don't know this for sure, but I would assume the one thing he regrets is that the Nets didn't win it all when he was there. And that might be one wrong. Not wrong is probably the wrong word, but write that part away and at least give it a try, especially if they're able to get him a comparable number 2. It's a non-zero chance. It could happen.
I'm going 15% chance, Sharif. 15% chance he comes back here to finish the job.
Okay. Honestly, I would like those odds. This offseason will be very interesting.
All right. Next 5 games, the Nets will resume play against the Cavaliers on Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. EST. After that, they got the Sixers, the Wizards, the Thunder, the Blazers. I don't know which games are home and away without looking. But just based, okay, so here we go. We have great podcasting that I don't have the schedule. Here we go. So home against Cleveland, away against Philly, away against Washington, home against OKC and Portland. What is the Nets record the next 5 games?
So I'll say, let's see. They'll definitely beat the Wizards. The Trailblazers. You know what? I'll say 2-3. I think that the Cavs will probably, blow the doors open on them. The Sixers, I'm just going to assume Joel Embiid's going to play in that game. And if he does, that will probably be a Sixers win. Obviously, they'll beat the Wizards. Well, actually, that's not as guaranteed because they did just lose to the Wizards. But I think they'll beat the Wizards. The Thunder will probably kick their heads in. And then the Trailblazers, I'll give the Nets the nod on that one because they're at home.
I'll go 3-2. The only game I'll disagree with you on is Philadelphia. I think Philly's in shambles right now. They're just continuing to go downhill. Shout out, by the way, to former Brooklyn Net Lonnie Walker. Got signed by the Sixers today. I think Nets fans freaking loved Lonnie when he was here. I texted my buddy who's a Sixers fan. I said, right now he's your third best scorer after Embiid and Maxey. It's Lonnie Walker. That might be an exaggeration, but I don't care. Some of the highlights that Lonnie Walker gave us in his lone season in Brooklyn were freaking awesome. But I'm going to go 3-2. I'm going to say they win that game in Philadelphia. They've been pretty good on the road this season.
Yeah, those are all probably good bets. I think the Philly game, like I said, for me, it would depend on if Embiid plays or not. I'm just going to assume he plays because he didn't play in the last one. And if he plays, the Sixers are definitely a better team. But, you never know with Joel. So
you never know. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our show. Sharif, is there anything or anybody you want to plug before we wrap up?
Nothing, nobody I want to plug. I just want to thank you for having me on. We can have, a pretty good conversation about the Nets. Obviously, my name's Sharif Phillips-Keaton. I'm editor of Nets Wire, part of USA Today Sports. Check me out on, Twitter, and check me out on Nets Wire. You want to, catch up on me as I try to cover this team. There's 28 games left, so it'll be interesting.
Listen, I'm extremely happy you came on. I had a fun time. I'd love to have you on again in the future if you're ever available. But I am going to plug somebody. It's going to be you. You're awesome. And please read some of Sharif's articles. The only other plug I'm going to do, and I hate that I'm doing this because he's barely on the show anymore, but my brother's comedy sketch show, I Mostly Blame Myself. They have a live show on Friday and Saturday this week at the Players Theater in Manhattan. Look it up. It's a really funny show. My brother's kind of a funny guy. They got these hilarious sketches they do. They do about 8 to 9 sketches a show, and then there's one intermission. But 9 p.m., I think Friday and Saturday. I don't quote me on those times. I Mostly Blame Myself. Co-host Nick. Again, I didn't want to do it, Sharif. I didn't want to do it because he's never here. But unfortunately, we're blood. We're related.
No, that's a great plug. Help your brother out. He comes on here, helps you out, I guess, when he wants to. So,
when he wants to,
I get it. Yeah.
He's optional. But hey, I'm your host, Spen Harris. He's Sharif Phillips-Keaton. Thank you guys for listening to this week's episode of Spenny and the Nets, and we will see you next week. Thanks again, Sharif.